They say that modern life offers endless choices, which is exactly why so many people freeze at the first problem. The paradox is elegant and cruel. The more abundance, the more fragility. Resilience is required. Distraction is served. Freedom is sold. Dependence on screens, comments and dopamine is indulged in. There is talk of self-care, but the package comes with anxiety, timed ostracism, and fear of missing the weekly trending bandwagon. On this slippery slope, a manual of pocket crises ceases to be intellectual vanity and becomes a tool of survival, discreet as a Swiss Army knife inside the lining of the coat, small, portable, fast, zero glamour and a lot of utility. With each roll, a promise, prosperity in 3 steps, peace in 5 habits, joy in 7 hacks. Meanwhile, the mind learns that serenity is an application that is updated daily and emotional stability. A subscription service, the old custom of accepting the difficult has been replaced by the belief that all discomfort is a bug to be reported. Here is the inaugural provocation. Perhaps the crisis is not a failure of the system, but the system operating according to design. Those who bet all their chips on continuous peace make the first turbulence a heck. Those who train turbulence transform the hecatomb into a manageable routine. Stoicism offered this map long before the internet invented the feed. What is under control and what is not? What depends on judgment and what belongs to the theater of the world? Simple, almost offensive because it is so unglamorous, at the same time, deep enough to silence period noises. The tension that is established is clear. On the one hand, the culture of quick adjustment, which transforms people into consumers of formulas. On the other, the discrete discipline of those who choose to govern their own attention before governing anything else. This script chooses the uncomfortable side. Less charm, more ground. In crisis, surgical cuts solve more than speeches. A pocket crisis manual does not promise miracles, promises steady hands. That it starts like this. A drop in emotional energy. In the middle of the workday, an aggressive comment that crosses the chest. A news that turns into a tsunami in the head. A public error multiplied by algorithms. The reflex trained by mainstream culture tells you to open the right application. Ask for validation. Outsource interpretation. The discrete manual suggests another order of battle. First, pause, then, appointment, then tiny, executable decision. The person who adopts this choreography does not look heroic. It seems old-fashioned, like someone who still carries a handkerchief in his pocket. And it is precisely this air of a museum piece that saves her when the building catches fire. From here, principles leave philosophy and enter the carpentry of the day. Those who refuse to live as hostage to the next crisis do not wait for motivation. Consolidates mechanisms. In my pocket, in my notebook, in my brain. The text follows with a hammer, nail, plumb line. The manual opens. The first invisible chapter is called Attention Governance. In the past, this had another name, recollection. The difference is not poetic, it is technical. The mind that harvests inwards decides what goes in and out. The mind connected by default decides only after everything has already entered in crisis. The asymmetry is brutal. Those who have a government of attention fabricate a horizon. Those who don't have it manufacture alarms. An alarm, by definition, goes off for any reason. Pocket protocol, no. One lives in the breath. 5 slow breaths, counted like praying a ruler. At each expiration, a binary inventory. What depends on one's own judgment and what does not. No mystical mantras, no magic words, just the courage to relocate focus. At the end of a minute, something that seemed like a catastrophe becomes something nameable. The body disarms, the language returns. A minute without a show is a century of lucidity. Protocol no. 2 is a portable tombstone, memento mori, not to dramatize, but to level. A life that fits in a paragraph cannot allow an anonymous comment to become a decree. When finitude enters, the evaluation changes scale. What used to occupy the entire screen becomes a footnote. The manual does not use this image to preach morbidity. It uses to calibrate compass. Once the compass is calibrated, the path is not easy, but it is less random. Than premeditatio malorum, the preparation without spectacle. The mainstream hates this block. It considers it victimist, negative. It disrupts the mindset. Curious confusion between cheering and planning. In the past it was called prudence. Whoever draws the worst 5 pages of a project loss, of customer, delay of supplier, public rumor, technical failure, mistake of his own does not attract disaster. It attracts preparation. In crisis, The prepared is not the one who predicted everything, it is the one that is not offended by reality. In the field of digital life, the manual also suggests the drama budget, a low-limit emotional checking. Account X minutes a day to discuss what happens in the feeds. 10 minutes per week to publish justifications or notes. X minutes per month to adjust narratives. Nothing plastered. Just the reminder that drama, like any resource, when unlimited, devours the essential. With a minimum ceiling, the drama needs to choose priorities and, in addition, delivers clues about what really matters. The criticism of occasional self-help is made here without insult, only with mental numbers. Everything that promises performance, without discipline, sells fantasy. Everything that encourages outbursts without discretion sells audience. Everything that confuses authenticity with constant exposure sells data. When the veneer is torn apart, the old concept of virtue appears as the only incontestable good: character, judgment, act. Without this, there is no manual. There are slogans. The pocket manual, on the contrary, is content with small gears repeated until they become bones. Enter the exercises, the kind that doesn't ask for expensive props. Voluntary discomfort, the old eccentricity that the ancients already understood. A cold shower, a journey without headphones, a meal without extra seasoning, a day with few words, not by penance, but by refinement. The muscle that accepts voluntary discomfort does not make a storm by any drizzle. In times of permanent comfort, the discomfort chosen is vaccinated. He who practices it does not become a bitter ascetic. He becomes someone who trades better with the whims of the world. Next, the anti-panic notebook. It is not a diary of emotions. It is a handwritten spreadsheet of decisions. 3 columns: situation, control, minimum action. The person writes, meeting went wrong. I don't control other people's moods. Send an objective summary and ask for a point. Another line, rumor in the group. I don't control interpretations. Write a clear sentence and silence notifications for 2 hours. The notebook does not work miracles, but it names the bulls. And an ox with a name does not scare in the dark. We speak, then, of the triad of silence. 10 minutes of silence before any response that involves reputation. 10 hours before any publication that involves conflict. 10 days before reformulating principles. It sounds strict, and it is. It is more curious to realize how most of the crises that escalate in public are born from the first response. The one that tries to save the impression and despises the substance. The soundtrack of the modern Stoic has slow beats. An objection arises. Wouldn't this manual be ignoring real injustices, violence, systems that crush, backwards, precisely because he recognizes that there are storms that cannot be resolved with breaths? He refuses to fantasize about control where there is only courage and a long way. In structural crises, the manual does not preach passivity, offers focus. What can you do today that doesn't feed the monster? What not to do to avoid becoming fuel? By reducing the anxiety of the everything, the manual restores strength to the something. In corporate life, this translates into 3 floor metrics: hours slept, difficult conversations made in advance, and decisions reversed without guilt. All 3 seem banal. The 3 decide careers. Without sleep, the brain turns into an echo room for panic. Without difficult talks anticipated, conflicts turn into explosions. Without reversal, without guilt, mistakes become stubbornness, and stubbornness becomes a permanent crisis. The past knew this tripod by other names: rest, frankness, and humility. Modernity has renamed them and forgotten them. There's also an antidote to paralysis: pocket rules for bad days. One of them is the 30-30-30. 30 minutes of movement without music, 30 minutes of dense reading without screens, 30 minutes of work focused on something that produces value for another human being. Those who comply with this block create traction in adverse terrain. It doesn't cure everything, but it does make the 100% wasted day impossible. Another rule, even more portable, is the decision of 2 verbs. When everything collapses, choose 2 useful verbs and execute them in sequence. Organize, write, clean, turn on cooking, studying. The mind grows when it realizes that it is still acting. When the storm involves reputation, the manual exchanges stage 4 workshop. Instead of inflamed notes comes the lean procedure. Recognize the specific error, correct the process, communicate what changes, and then turn off the tap of explanations. The algorithm will ask for more drama. Dignity will ask for less stage. This is where antiquity wins over the present. Decorum is more expensive than achievement, and it is paid for at the right time. Turn their own future into a meteorological whim. The old world knew another formula: routine as a trail, motivation as an occasional passenger. Nothing stands in the way of the beauty of an afternoon of epiphany. What prevents collapse is waking up even without an epiphany. In crisis, routine is an umbrella. Without it, the rain becomes a flood. Now the criticism goes up a notch. The perpetual performance industry has hijacked an ancient language virtue, discipline, purpose, and repackaged it into collections of impossible goals. The result is elegant fatigue, with premium apps and full-color reports. The pocket manual calls for more poverty: paper, pencil, watch. What is an acceptable bedtime? What is the limit of public exposure per week? What is the minimum number of difficult conversations that resolves more tensions than it generates? These questions do not delight, but saved at the presence in digital environments asks for a separate chapter. The manual proposes the quarantine of opinion. When a topic explodes, adopt the protocol of deliberate delay. A whole day without giving an opinion, except in cases of direct liability. During this period, he only read and noticed inconsistencies in his own impulse. The curious thing is to observe how, at the end of the deadline, 80% of the emergency rooms die of natural causes. The rest, when they demand a voice, gain a less hysterical and more useful voice. By saving one's own voice, one also saves the ears of others. Then comes a rule that resembles craftsmanship: minimum viable scope of dignity. In any project, career, family, reputation, there is a small set of gestures that preserves what cannot be auctioned. Telling the truth even when it hurts, fulfilling agreements without outsourcing excuses, protecting those who have no voice at the moment. Stoicism would call this erit, excellence of character. In common language, it is an action that does not embarrass itself when no one is looking. To deal with anxious consumerism, the manual uses arithmetic: one in, one out. If a new task comes in, an old non-essential one leaves. If a new habit comes in, a habit comes out that sucks attention. If a new gadget comes in, an old one that has become totemic comes out and no one remembers why. The rule reduces the obesity of options and returns muscles to the will. It also dissolves the superstition that buying the next accessory will cure decision weariness. Almost always, it only multiplies it. On a more intimate level, the manual suggests a test of value called grandfather sense. Faced with a dilemma, ask if the oldest and wisest person in the family would consider the gesture worthy, even without understanding the technology involved. It is not about blind nostalgia, but about calibrating the gesture by the meter that survives fashions. In volatile times, judgments that span decades become beams. Things change, but the demand for dignity changes much less than the feeds suggest. At this point, the manual does not try to convince with rhetoric, offers tools. Only one changes the relationship with the day, breaks without stimulus. It's not a fantasy detox, it's a noise diet. 15 minutes in the morning without a screen, 15 in the afternoon, 15 at night. The strange brain complains, threatens to sue the owner. Then it becomes sharper in crisis. This muscle of supporting interval is the margin between reaction and response. Without margin, the person becomes an avatar. All that remains is to tie the protocols in a single thread. And it has a short name: hierarchy. On top, the trial; below, the circumstances; at the base, the small actions. The trial decides what gets an internal stage. The circumstances only inform. Small actions build the day. This hierarchy corrects a common mistake, inverting the pyramid and asking the world to authorize its own calm. Calm does not ask permission. It asks for training. So the manual makes its most unsympathetic proposal to the algorithm: staying in the project when the curation of novelties shines across the street. Staying in relationships that require conversation, not performance. Stay in discipline even when the audience asks for a show. This ancient verb is a forgotten technology in a scenario that rewards those who jump from wave to wave. Those who stay produce quality almost by accident, and, without realizing it, learn to go through crises with the dignity of those who know the ground. The final plan is terribly simple, and therefore rarely executed. For each of the four fronts: attention, body, work. Reputations choose to pocket rules and practice them until they look like part of the skin. Attention, breathing in 5 cycles and quarantine of opinion. Body, 30 minutes of daily movement, without music and sleep as a non-negotiable priority. Work, 30 minus 30 minus 30 and difficult conversations anticipated. Reputation, triad of silence and recognition of error without a stage. The rest is commentary. In terms of concrete action, the manual ends with a lean challenge. Pick a small crisis that's ongoing, a friction with a colleague, a conversation debt, a stuck project, a disturbing rumor, and apply the full protocol in the next 24 hours. Breathing, binary naming, minimal action, drama budget, strategic silence, lean communication, closing the loop. The result will not come with fireworks. It will come with an internal, almost inaudible click, the sense that one's own hand has returned to the wheel. If this manual finds use in other hands, it is advisable to transform it into a visible act. Registration to sustain new conversations, comments to enrich the workshop of ideas, sharing to expand the radius of those who need this type of tool. There is too much spectacle in the world. It lacks basic emotional engineering. The more pockets equipped with discrete instruments, the fewer sirens will be needed. There is a sentence in the pocket, good to carry between the keys. When everything calls for haste, choose character. When everything calls for a stage, to choose substance. When everything calls for an opinion, choose silence. When everything calls for victory, choose a path. Crisis is not called for genius. It is an invitation to be an adult. And adults, in the end, are the ones who do what they should. When no one applauds,